Okay, this is Count Valerian, the Balatone, and pardon me, global. There we go. That wasn't too terrifying. I'm going to quickly tell you a few truths about Tolkien that you might not be aware of. Fast facts about Tolkien. It is written, Tolkien is a mystery. Morumbar knows him, but who knows Morumbar? Tolkien has analyzed his psyche, but who knows what that is worth? Great Cthulhu is his cousin, but even he cannot see his thoughts. Great Manwë sits on his throne in Taniquetel, whence his gaze pierces through the mists and darknesses of the earth. But who can see into the mind of Tolkien, he who once walked alone in the void and spoke to the nameless creatures that dwell in the realms of dreams and shadows? What is Tolkien? This is an enigma that has exercised some of the most brilliant minds in history. Some have even doubted Tolkien's existence, but we who have heard the words of Tolkien's glorious CEO, Mr. Morumbar Udunvagor, know otherwise. The origins of Tolkien are unknown. It is rumored that he caused the Big Bang by lighting his pipe. Was there indeed ever when Tolkien is not? However, thanks to FAT's research, for which we are particularly grateful to Dr. Horace Engels and Baron Bogus, we now know that Tolkien has existed in various guises, or avatars, for millennia. And recent studies suggest that he is pre-human, possibly even pre-vertebrate. Furthermore, our scientists have determined that each step of physical evolution was also the work of Tolkien. Tolkien was the first bacterium to become an amoeba. He was the first multicellular organism, the first trilobite, the first vertebrate. He it was who first dared to leave the waters for the dry land. He who became the first mammal, and he who first stood erect. He then invented the razor, shaved off all his fur, and became human. And he is who transcended humanity. We believe that he is now a giant celestial jellyfish, but Morumbar has not spoken on this point, and scholars cannot map him. For the Tolkien sind frei. Who is Tolkien? This too is a mystery. We may, however, dismiss the claim that Tolkien was the natural son of King Fred. Prehistoric cave paintings portray him as a being dressed in skins and smoking a pipe, which ignorant archaeologists interpreted as a spear. The first written words say, Yabba dabba doo tom bombadillo. Thus saith Morumbar. There are also numerous findings of ancient hunters actually biting off their fingers and then painting their handprint in the cave wall with red paint, clearly in honor of Frodo Four Fingers. Let none deny that, or doubt that. Tolkien's coming was foretold by many prophets, some of whom may have been avatars of Tolkien himself. In medieval France, there was a popular epic about Tolkien called the Chanson de Ronald that relates his exploits in the Spanish Civil War. The traitor Ganelon is obviously modeled on Lewis. There are even lost strophes where he invents Narni. They even had a horn called the Oliphant. That's a metaphor for cigars. prophesying that Tolkien would have the best taste in cigars. And Bernard the Fox foreshadows the talking fox, etc. We don't know for certain if Tolkien was even born or if he simply chose to manifest himself. It is, of course, generally believed that he was born to Arthur and Mabel Tolkien on the 3rd of January, 1892, and indeed we use that date as the basis of our calendar. But given what we know of Tolkien's pre-existence, it would be very naive to assume that Tolkien was born just because he chose to make it seem as if he were. For many have been the avatars of Tolkien. Note, it seems most likely that the last Tolkien is the seal of the Tolkiens, and that there will be no other until the world end. One way of framing the question, who is Tolkien, is to ask, what functions has Tolkien filled in his diuturnity? That's Diuturnity, if you want to look it up. We have grouped these functions into the following categories: the warrior, the smoker, the inventor, the scholar, and the author. Tolkien the warrior. Pre-birth. So far, evidence shows that Tolkien was Alexander the Great, Attila the Hun, Nelson, etc., and brought about the barbarian invasions, the Crusades, etc. Was Tolkien a Hungarian hussar? Although that claim has been made, the evidence for his being English is too strong to ignore. Maybe Tolkien was Dracula? After all, Dracula is first heard of stopping the Ottoman conquest in Europe in the 1420s, and 1420 is a very Tolkien date. And if Tolkien / Dracula serfs rebelled against Tolkien's will, surely they deserve to be impaled. But it seems more likely that they were enemies and that the Count was justly cursed, what he defiled one of Tolkien's early manuscripts. The manuscripts revealed the recipe for lembas, with the main ingredient, blood. Blood is life, wrote Tolkien, and blood gives lembas its special kick. This theory gains plausibility from the fact that Tolkien's enemies usually ended up undead. Post-birth. To begin with, there's a letter indicating that Tolkien enlisted at the apparent age of 10 and won the Boer War. Tolkien played an even grander role in World War I, as this statement indicates. By 1914, Tolkien's enemies had realized that they needed bigger schemes to stop him. So they started World War I for the single reason to get him killed. This is seen by many historians as the most shameful crime ever. But higher powers protected Tolkien, and he won the war. This is found at Mr. Noel Quackley von Schniefel's website, but it's probably true, except of course that Tolkien needed no protection. ... Tolkien's enemies probably started the war in order to distract his attention from the rise of communism, since they would have been stupid to think they could get rid of him. But maybe they were stupid. Tolkien was also the leading figure in the Spanish Civil War, which he allegorized in Lord of the Rings. Mr. Maramba proved that one of the defining events of Tolkien's life took place at Guernica. He rescued a Prussian pilot from a shot-down Stuka bomber. A communist rebel patrol led by Pablo Neruda found them. Neruda immediately recognized Tolkien. "Die, you talentless hack," he cried. "Your poems are crap and they disrupt the plot flow." But his Tokarev TT-33 jammed. Just then, the Prussian officer cried, "The Eagles kommen!" Blast wave from the bomb struck Neruda down, and he fell on top of the officer. Tolkien had to pull the officer out and carry him to safety. They did cook rabbit stew on their way to safety, that much I can reveal. Tolkien probably also won World War II. See below, was Tolkien a Nazi? One of the most annoying debates concerns the question of whether Tolkien led children to war. Of course he did, and rightly so. Tolkien led a battalion of Tots in World War I called the Trained Youthful Killers Extraordinaire, Tyke. And another during the Spanish Civil War called Jóvenes Unidos por la Nación. God. Jóvenes Unidos por la Nación y el Imperio contra las organizaciones revolucionarias. Oh, God. Usually I can speak Spanish better than that, but something happened to me just now. He thus gave them a valuable lesson in heroism and discipline. Tolkien the smoker. Teaching us that smoking is healthy, Tolkien indulged in not just pipes, but all forms of nicotiana from at least the time that he was a dinosaur. Therefore, you should buy and consume lots of tobacco products, especially if they're fats brands. It's questionable whether Tolkien did marijuana and other illegal drugs, though, so keep those on hold. He did, however, make excellent coffee. Further, Bogus states that Mayan inscriptions name a certain Tolkien as inventor of the cigar, which brings us to... Half a second, let me just check something really quick. Okay, you can hide that. Which brings us to Tolkien the inventor. In addition to cigars, Tolkien, in various incarnations, also invented whiskey and distilled his own brand of it, Tolkai wine, plutonium, fireworks, trains, tomatoes, potatoes, umbrellas, computers, vaccination, whoops, that'll be controversial, the wheel, transcendental meditation, Trojans, existence, and capitalism. Tolkien also inspired great inventions and works of art, even in cases where he did not bother to create them himself, as they were trifles almost beneath his notice. For example, as Mr. Udunvagor has revealed, as any fool can see, it was the 3 peaks on Khazad-dûm that inspired the 3 pyramids of Giza, and the Sphinx is a golem that got out of hand. Tolkien also invented space travel and was the first captain of the Enterprise. His adventures in space are classified due to mature theme. And that's just for starters. Tolkien the scholar. Before he was born, or, quote, born, end quote, in scare quotes, Tolkien invented the English language as well as all other languages, with the possible exception of French. He was also one of the great thinkers in history. He was also all the great thinkers in history. From Diogenes the Cynic to the guy in the Ayn Rand books. Tolkien knew everything, and even at the age of 2, commented that the philological theories of the brothers Grimm were, quote, jejune, end quote. That's Jejune. By the time he was in kindergarten, Tolkien's teachers were sitting at his feet. Tolkien admittedly had an advantage in studying Germanic literature since he was the author of almost all ancient Germanic literature. But then he also wrote every other major intellectual work from Aristotle's Poetics to Don Brown's Da Vinci Code. Which brings us to Tolkien the author. Pre-birth. According to Baron Moron Bogus, the head librarian of the Forger Tolkien Library, Tolkien's medieval correspondence proves conclusively Tolkien's authorship of almost the entire corpus of medieval Germanic literature. Tolkien's self-instantiations in various ways served the immutable purpose of creating his masterpiece, Lord of the Rings. That is why Tolkien, knowing he would write a masterpiece based on Teutonic traditions, incarnated himself as Attila the Hun, driving the barbarians into Europe and thus indirectly causing England. Coincidentally, Baron Bogus is descended from Attila as well. Then he, meaning Tolkien, incarnated himself as various Germanic epic poets. He also wrote Gilgamesh, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Frogs, the Ramayana, the I Ching, the Fairy Queen, the 1001 Nights, the Morte d'Arthur, Moll Flanders, Johnson's Dictionary, John Giovanni, War and Peace, the Pickwick Papers, and Lesbian Lust. Note, Gilgamesh's name appears to have really been Bilbamesh, and Enkidu therefore must have been Frodo. Utnapishtim was yet another one of Gandalf's names, while Ishtar, whose advances Bilbamesh spurned, may have been Eowyn. So the question is, what is symbolized by the prostitute who distracted Enkidu by having sex with him for 4 days straight? Was it Galadriel showing how time runs differently in Lorien or Shelob? Evidence for the latter is that variants have been found with the name Shilubba violently crossed out. And is it a coincidence that one of the principal Mesopotamian cities was Uruk? But Tolkien carried it even further and actually incarnated himself within his own writings, figuring in various roles such as the Trojan horse, Don Juan de Tircino, etc. And some of these incarnations also wrote stuff. Yes, Tolkien had the power to create a world and then incarnate himself within it, and then, though fictional, write things. Recently, Bogus has ruminated on the possibility that Tolkien might even have written the Grand Canyon. So, have a second. Just checking something quickly. What didn't Tolkien write? Pre-birth. Tolkien didn't write the filth that passes for the works of Chaucer or Shakespeare. And he didn't write anything Roman because the Romans were rubbish. Post-birth. This is a bit trickier, since not everything published under Tolkien's name is actually by him. As Mr. Odunvagor has revealed, the books of Tolkien, as they have been published, have already been altered by nefarious narrow minds, who shall not be named now. Thus, while the movies include many changes, those changes in fact bring the work closer to the original spirit and intent of Tolkien himself. The letters, for example, are suspect unless edited by Fat's faculty, and have been forged by that notorious Tolkien hater, Humphrey Carpenter. Furthermore, we know that Christopher Tolkien destroyed many of Tolkien's writings in a desperate attempt to keep up appearances. And because he was a narrow-minded, conventional liberal liar. Tolkien and sex. That brings us to Tolkien and sex, but this is a subject far too advanced for the tender minds who are just coming to know Tolkien. given that Lustwolf claims that Tolkien had a thing for... we better not finish this sentence. But this much we can say. Tolkien probably did not have sex with Edith. He didn't like her muffins either. Who were Tolkien's children? It is highly unlikely that any of Tolkien's generally identified children were actually his. Most likely they were the natural sons and daughter of Edith and a French Vichy, of course, lieutenant named Gustave. The other probability in the case of Christopher is that they were manufactured by vile arts in a secret place. On the other hand, the Tolkien Code does imply that Tolkien had descendants. There is a rumor that Tolkien had an illegitimate child with one of the most famous prostitutes of his time. Christopher Tolkien covered it up and tried to ruin the child's talent by mercilessly exposing it to Disney movies. But people see there is a secret society that rescued that child and raised it in a hidden place. Think it through, the true blood of Tolkien with his talent and power. Subsequent records show that this prostitute was a space ant. We will, however, neither confirm nor deny that Mr. Udunvagor is this child. The case of, quote, Christopher Tolkien, end quote. The one thing certain is that Christopher is not Tolkien's son, but his worst enemy. Other than that, there are several theories besides that mentioned above. There is, for example, a theory that he was an ant, an evil ant who crushed people under his feet and grew marijuana outside his house. This is Horace Engels' view, and therefore may have hidden meanings beyond the surface of the mysterious words. Another expert suggests Christopher Tolkien was, I now guess, really some dread being of the netherworld. Was he an unquiet spirit of dread, roaming around writing notes about elf splits? What is known about Christopher Tolkien is a demon who from the very beginning sought to distort Tolkien's works from birth. Indeed, Christopher started to project evil thoughts into Tolkien's head before he was even born. Must write new diagram of Elvish languages. When Christopher was born, he immediately started to play mind games with his presumed father. He said nothing as he lay in his crib. He just moved his foot in mysterious circles. He later explained that he was trying to make a footnote. His first words were, "Spell it Morthond, and drop the adulterous subplot." The claim has been made that Christopher Tolkien was the result of Tolkien's pact with the devil, who reportedly said, "I promise you'll get this book of a short guy living in the hole published if you adopt my son and raise him as your own." This theory runs into the difficulty that Tolkien would have annihilated any evil supernatural force simply by a well-aimed puff of smoke from his pipe. All evil things are anti-tobacco, as even Lewis knew. Therefore, Christopher's existence was tolerated by Tolkien for mysterious purposes of his own. Tolkien actually planned to reveal Christopher's evil in the new Shadow, which eventually would have featured Christopher emerging as the new Dark Lord. Small wonder Christopher, quote, made, end quote, him cancel that plan. There are also bits in Lord of the Rings where warnings about Christopher are coded, rather like Samizdat. For example, Old Man Willow is an anagram of Christopher in an Elvish dialect. Christopher burned the only existing essay about the dialect in question, the Christophoria. But Morambar Udunvagor recovered the burning fragments, thus once again saving the truth. Christopher also suppressed the other unknown masterpieces. The Sausage Dogs, one of Tolkien's greatest works, didn't cut the mustard with Christopher, so he, quote, persuaded, end quote, his father not to, quote, his, quote, father, end quote, not to, quote, publish, end quote, it. The only known copy is hidden in the Tolkien family vault. The family vault is secret. That grave in the Oxford suburbs is a false trail. But of course, Tolkien isn't really dead. It's also been theorized that Christopher was the spawn of Tolkien and a spider, this being why Christopher was able to produce so many footnotes, because he had 8 feet. Tolkien did sleep with sleep ants, and in theory it's not too big a jump to spiders. That said, Tolkien loathed spiders because they reminded him of the web of international communism. So probably what happened is that, quote, is that Edith slept with spiders. Then she ate them, destroying the evidence. It would explain why Christopher Tolkien is evil. The only problem being that Dr. Lustmulch thinks Edith was a flat wooden board because Tolkien didn't sleep with her. But he could be wrong. Some of his theories remain very controversial. Another possibility, of course, is that he was the last child of Ungoliant, the troubled then happy world. Okay, let's skip over this. Tolkien's friends and enemies. Apart from Mr. Morambar Odunvigor, the best known of Tolkien's friends was Lewis before he broke their friendship when Lewis began, quote, seeing, end quote, Tolkien's flame du jour. According to Lustmulch, her name was Fimbrathil, and Lewis wrote passionate love poems to her. By the way, Queen Jadis was modeled on Edith, and Uncle Andrew is Lewis's self-insertion. Tolkien and Lewis belonged to an informal Oxford club called the Inklings. Chapter 3 of the Vice-Regent Pseudonymous the Jellyfish's autobiography includes this fascinating vignette that comes directly from Mr. Odunvigor. They had a regular ritual. One would throw dice to determine whose turn it was to talk, and would afterwards throw another die to determine whether what he said was in accord with the consensus of the group. Hugo Dyson, needless to say, never followed these rules. Dyson had green hair, white clown makeup, and a ghastly fixed smile, and was not only a jerk, but a vegetarian, a teetotaler, and a non-smoker, and wore a special kind of underclothes. He really could be very irritating at times. Now, as for Lewis, he never understood what it took to liberate the world from the sniveling losers and place it in the hands of the few, the proud, the cule. According to Horace Engels' research, Lewis later turned evil. Tolkien prophesied the downfall of communism and the internet revolution, even though his head was covered by a pair of swimming trunks, and C.S. Lewis, who was jealous of his popularity, had affixed iron balls and iron fetters, so-called bilbos, to his feet, and thrown him into the river Isis. His bad mumble when lecturing was due to him having to speak to his students from the bottom of the river. Obviously, though, Tolkien had no difficulty foiling Lewis's plots. Though a lesser light before the sun of Tolkien's splendor, Charles Williams had much in common with Tolkien on higher or deeper levels. Okay, Tolkien and politics. Tolkien had very strong political views. He loathed democracy and loathed socialism even more. He admired Generalissimo Franco and, towards the end, Pinochet, however he's pronounced. That guy, the guy in Chile. His hatred of welfares and other forms of communism appears often in his writings. For example, Smog the Golden was originally Smog the Red, and he had to be stopped because he was donating all his wealth to the poor, which would have corrupted society. Per Mr. Odunvagor, the Attlee government, the Labour government in Britain, forced Tolkien to remove all messages in Lord of the Rings where the free hobbit, Shrotter, who escaped from the socialism of the Shire to a new frontier life in the wilderness, mocks the way of his passive cousins have voluntarily allowed their society to self-mutilate. In revenge, Tolkien created the ultimate royalist character of Aragorn Elessar, who foreshadows the coming of Margaret Thatcher. And Tolkien himself states, of course there were certain books that do arouse and imaginatively satisfy certain wishes that ought to be left alone, like social reform pamphlets for a better world and all that rubbish. He appears to have agreed with Charles Williams' statement that, quote, humanitarianism is a bit of a bore, quite. That's why I want to have a human sacrifice when the war is over. The new League of Nations should be dedicated to the future with blood formally shed. Was Tolkien a Nazi? The claim is often made that by Tolkien's enemies, deliberately misunderstanding his predilection for fascism, but it is false. He considered Hitler a ruddy little ignoramus who was stupid. Tolkien's preferred spelling, to declare war on everyone and then kill lots of people. ... So, was Tolkien murdered? Incontrovertible evidence proves that Tolkien was indeed murdered, but the perpetrator has long eluded discovery. Lewis may be discounted as Tolkien's murderer, since he was already dead. He may have been killed by a Scanian terrorist. ... But nothing can truly kill the immortal Tolkien. He liveth still in aromatic tobacco until the end of days. And that is that. Have a riot.